Worcester, here we are. It's noon. It's July 5th. It's the annual reading of Frederick Douglass's 4th of July speech. Welcome. I am Plum Borisius from Mass Humanities, and Mass Humanities is incredibly pleased that once again in Worcester we're doing this year. I'm here to tell you a hair about the logistics about what's happening, and then I'm going to get out of your way. First, we're going to have a few people introducing what's going on, just very briefly, and then we're going to do the reading. And when the reading starts, everyone is invited to participate. And what happens is that Patty, the woman in the in the yellow shirt over there, she holds the speeches as you do, but she's also the head of the line. So when the reading starts, you can line up behind Patty and just simply take the number, your number from the person in front of you. They read 36, you read 37. And then the other piece of logistics that is really important is that you step up as soon as the person in front of you is finished reading. You should start reading, because otherwise we'll be here the day after tomorrow still, and we don't want that. So welcome, and without further ado, here's Councillor Kate Toomey to open the event for the city.
Thank you so very much, and I really appreciate all that you've done. The City of Worcester, and I'm saying this on behalf of my colleagues on the City Council and the Mayor, we thank you and we welcome you here for this most important event. Only in our country, only in America, can a gentleman say, who was born a slave, what is possible for me is possible for you. Mass Humanities, you organized this statewide and enabled us to be your partner in this important and poignant event. Frederick Douglass had three key steps for success in life. One was believe in yourself. The next was take advantage of every opportunity and use the power of spoken and written language to effect positive change for yourself and others. Those are incredible, powerful words that we should all take heed. And I hope that through this exercise today that you will go out and tell other people what to do, that they need to empower themselves to help others. Frederick Douglass was born a slave and learned how to read on his own, and then became an incredible speaker and orator and changed the lives of so many, which you will hear from everyone here. So I want to thank you, and again, on behalf of my colleagues on the City Council, welcome, and have a great day. Thank you.
Back. Caught you looking for the same thing. It's a new thing. Check out this I bring. Uh-oh, the roll below the level cause I'm living low. Next to the bass. Come on, turn up the radio. They claiming I'm a criminal. But now I wonder how. Some people never know. The enemy, could it be their friend guardian? I'm not a hooligan. I rock the party and clear all the madness. I'm not a racist. Preach to teach to all. Cause some they never had this. Number one, born to run. Never about the gun. I wasn't licensed to have one. The minute they see me, fear me. I'm the epitome, a public enemy. Used, abused without clues. I refuse to blow a fuse. They even had it on the news. Public enemy, don't believe the hype. You may ask why. Why would a person who was on the podium today talking about what American independence means to the Negro 160 years later feel like this is just a preamble to my speech? The orator Frederick Douglass insisted that the framers of the Constitution did not include the Negro in it. That as a new nation, democracy in its infancy, Mr. Douglass supported the founders of our new nation as they sought to portray it as a democracy in its infancy stage. Frederick Douglass believed on that day, July 5th, 1852, that the rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequested by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The thought of going forward was passed on to a generation of youth to take up the mantle of the greatest sin of America, the enslavement of the Negro. That if it were to come to pass, it would be the sons and daughters of this infant nation that would answer the question of what are we to do with the Negro? Well, I'm here to tell you, the sons and daughters of a democracy that is young in age of countries of old, that today the fight has not changed, that we are still today the American Negro, is the colored person of the 20s, the black fish toward the sky of the black and proud generation of the 1970s. Today, that fight continues. It continued with the passing of the Voter Rights Act of 1965. That right to vote is a right of every citizen of these great United States. As citizens, you and I have that responsibility to go to the polls and stand online, to wake up early, to stay up late, to vote on the next representative to the land of the free and the home of the brave. Those words would ring a hollow bell if we cannot and do not go and practice the constitutional right to vote. Frederick Douglass believed that the democracy that was established during the fighting of 1776 to be a hypocrisy, that the land we stand on was not for the Negro, the colored man of the 20s, or the black man of today. The only way we can stand firm under the Declaration of Independence banner, I'm a paraphrase, so my historical scholars, please bear with me. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, driving their just power from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of the government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. It is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for the future. With the power we have at the ballot box, we can always be positioned to secure these rights every 2, 4, or 6 years to shape this new democracy. We are here today to stand with the community, to give voice to a speech that shows the world that although you may honor, sacrifice your life, and promote the prosperity of legacy with which you may have and stand as one under a flag of a nation not born until recent history. That we as citizens, students of history, teachers of the youth, and promoters of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that change is coming. We stand as one under a flag of a nation not born until recent history, but nevertheless, with its ills inflicted in it during its birth, there's a need to know our forefathers, not just to honor our forefathers, not just with chants of celebration, but with visions and actions to make this nation a better tomorrow. With that being said, the Worcester branch of the NAACP encourage you to register vote and to actually vote for the future generation of this nation. Thank you all for being here today. Please complete the voter registration forms this afternoon. We have some here at the table in the front. And the Worcester branch of the NAACP would like to again thank you. And God bless. Cedric Arnold, President, Worcester branch, NAACP.
Okay, well, I'm afraid I'm going to be a somewhat boring academic speaker after that. My name is Thomas Doughton, and I teach at the College of the Holy Cross, and I have been asked to do a no more than 5-minute introduction. So I'm going to keep to that schedule as much as possible. I want to begin with a quotation, which is not necessarily in your reading of the speech, but to a certain extent helps contextualize this. And I think this quotation from the Psalms will be familiar to many of you. Central to this talk and comparable talks by African American people before the Civil War is a theme of God's holy people being held in unjust bondage. So what organizes much of this for Frederick Douglass is the notion, by the waters of Babylon, there we sat and we wept remembering Zion. On the poplars there we hung up our harps. Oh, how can you sing a song of freedom on alien soil? Which is very much what this whole talk of Frederick Douglass was about. Now, on July 5th, 1852, at an invitation of the Rochester Ladies Anti-Slavery Society, Frederick Douglass delivered this first version of his speech to roughly 600 people at Rochester who felt it was worth paying 12 cents, 12.5 cents actually, to come hear Frederick Douglass as the key speaker. It was a very successful event, and we know that from his correspondence, he wrote right after this, "I have been engaged in writing a speech for the 4th of July, which has taken up much of my extra time for the last 2 or 3 weeks. Some think it a good speech." Well, we think it a good speech also. And his initial auditors, at the conclusion of his remarks, were so impressed that they agreed to publish 700 pamphlet copies of this speech, all which were purchased within a 3-day period. So it's a very successful notion. But I want to return to this central theme of how can you sing a song of freedom on alien soil. Frederick Douglass's oration is part of a great tradition of African American oratory that dates from the 1780s. In some ways, this may be the culmination of that tradition, but it is a tradition of mostly ministers and community leaders who had several important points they wanted to share with African Americans of the time and the general public. One is the notion of Africa as a sacred land, a holy motherland. The other is the notion of enslaved people as Hebrews. And the third is that only faith was going to bring about an end to this oppression. Now, at the time of this speech, there were almost 4 million African American people still held in slavery, and less than 1 million free people of color. But what is it he really wants us to understand on this day? In 1852, his position would have been, following the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, is this not working? Sort of running around. Is this working? Oh, okay. I just wasn't sure if I'd lost power there, as it were. At the time, to a certain extent, Frederick Douglass and other people would have been motivated by the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. But the point here is neatly summarized. And again, trying to ask a historian to speak about Frederick Douglass in 5 minutes is a rough one. But, he concludes, "What to the American slave is the 4th of July? I answer a day that reveals to him more than any other days in our year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciation of tyrants, base-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery, your prudence, your hymns and your sermons and thanksgivings with all of your religious parades and solemnity are to him bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy." Now that's very clear. That is exactly how Frederick Douglass saw the 4th of July, and how many African American people, even people here in Worcester, saw the celebration. Black folks, before the Civil War, celebrated on August 1st. And in fact, there is a long tradition of emancipation or Emancipation Day celebrations in Worcester, Massachusetts that go back to the 1830s, where people are commemorating the end of slavery in the British Empire. So in 1852, What would have been more important to black folks of the time would have been the big Emancipation Day celebration coming up on August 1st. The July 4th for Frederick Douglass and people who shared his sentiment was about bombast, hypocrisy, and actually for Americans should have been a day of shame that called into direct contradiction all of the alleged principles of 1776 and the fact that 4 million people were still held in bondage at that time. And my time has run out, but this is just to provide a little bit of introduction to what you're going to be hearing. Okay, thank you.
Mr. President, friends, and fellow citizens, the task before me is one which requires much previous thought and study for its proper performance. The pages and placards say that I am to deliver a 4th of July oration. This certainly sounds large and out of the common way, for it is true that I had often had the privilege to speak at this beautiful hall and to address many who now honor me with their presence. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to be overcome and getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here today is, to me, a matter of astonishment as well as gratitude.
This, for the purpose of this celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This, to you, is what Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It carries your minds back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life and reminds you that the people of America is now 76 years old. I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. You are even now only in the beginning of your national career, still lingering in the period of childhood. I repeat, I am glad this is so. There's hope in the thought, and hope is much needed under the dark clouds which hover above the horizon.
Fellow citizens, the simple story is that 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects. The style and title of your sovereign people, in which you now glory, was not then born. You were under the British crown. Your fathers esteemed the English government as the home government, England as the fatherland, although a considerable distance from your home, imposed in the exercise of its parental prerogatives upon its colonial children such restraints, burdens, and limitations as in its mature judgment it deemed wise, right, and proper.
But your fathers, who had not adopted the idea of the infallibility of government and the absolute character of its act, presumed to differ from the home government in respect to the wisdom and the justice of some of those burdens and restraints. They went so far as to pronounce the measures of government unjust, unreasonable, and oppressive, and altogether such as ought not to be quietly submitted to. I scarcely need say, fellow citizens, that my opinion of these measures fully accords with that of your fathers. Feeling themselves harshly and unjustly treated by the home government, your fathers, like men of honesty, and men of spirit earnestly sought redress. They petitioned and remonstrated. They did so in a decorous, respectful, and loyal manner. This, however, did not answer the purpose. They saw themselves treated with sovereign indifference, coldness, and scorn.
Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers became restive under this treatment. They felt themselves the victims of grievous wrongs, wholly incurable in their colonial capacity. With brave men, there's always a remedy for oppression. Just here, the idea of a total separation of the colonies from the crown was born. It was a startling idea, much more so than we, at this distance of time, regard it. The timid and the prudent of that day were, of course, shocked and alarmed by it. Their opposition to the then dangerous thought was earnest and powerful. But amid their terror and affrighted vociferations against it, the alarming and revolutionary idea moved on, and the country with it.
On the 2nd of July, 1776, the old Continental Congress, to the dismay of the lovers of ease and the worshipers of property, clothed that dreadful idea with all the authority of national sanction. They did so in the form of a resolution. We seldom hit upon resolutions drawn up in our day whose transparency is at all equal it. Resolved that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown.
Citizens, your fathers made good that resolution. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you, therefore, may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the great fact in your nation's history, the very ring bolt in the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny.
Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes, and for the good they did and the principles they contended for, I will unite with you to honor their memory.
They loved their country better than their own private interests, and all will concede that it is a rare virtue that ought to command respect. He who will, intelligently, lay down his life for his country is a man whom it is not human nature to despise. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the cause of their country.
They were peacemen, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. They were quiet men, but they did not shrink from agitating against oppression. They showed forbearance, but they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not in the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out the more as we contrast it with these degenerate times.
How circumspect, exact, and proportionate were all their movements. How unlike the politicians of an hour. Their statesmanship looked beyond the passing moment and stretched away in strength into the distant future, fully appreciating the hardship to be encountered, firmly believing in the right of their cause, wisely measuring the terrible odds against them. Your fathers, the fathers of this republic, laid the cornerstone of the national superstructure, which has risen and still rises in grandeur around you. Of this fundamental work, this day is the anniversary.
My business, if I have any here today, is with the present. To accept time with God and His cause is the ever-living now. We have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and to the future. Now is the time, the important time. Your fathers have lived, died, and have done their work, and have done much of it well. You live and must die, and you must do your work. You have no right to enjoy a child's share in the labor of your fathers, unless your children are to be blessed by your labor. You have no right to wear out and waste the hard-earned fame of your fathers to cover your indolence.
Fellow citizens, pardon me, allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in the Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I therefore called upon to bring a humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us?
Would to God, both for our sakes and yours, that an affirmative answer could truthfully be returned to these questions. Then would my task be light, my burden easy and delightful.
But such is not the state of the case. I say it with the sad sense of the disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us.
The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the Jubilee shouts that reached them.
My subject, then, fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day from the slave's point of view, standing here, identified with American bondsmen, making his wrongs mine. I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future.
Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity, which is outraged, in the name of liberty, which is fettered, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call you in question and to denounce, with all the emphasis I can command, everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate, I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word shall escape me that any man, whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice, or who is not at heart a slaveholder, shall not confess to be right and just.
I fancy I hear some one of my audience say, "It is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists fail to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? your cause would be much more likely to succeed. But I submit, where all is plain, there is nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue?
Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man? The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of laws for their government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia, which, if committed by a black man, subject him to the punishment of death, while only 2 of the same crimes will subject a white man to this like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being?
Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidding, under severe fines and penalties, the teaching of the slave to read or to write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beast of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls of the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish of the sea, and the reptiles that crawl shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then will I argue with you that the slave is a man.
For the present, it is enough to affirm the equal manhood of the Negro race. Is it not astonishing that, while we are plowing, planting, and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, and ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, enterprise common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian's God, and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave, we are called upon to prove that we are men.
Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty, that he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation, as a matter beset with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to be understood? How should I look today in the presence of Americans to show that men have a natural right to freedom? To do so would to make myself ridiculous, and to offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him.
What? Am I to argue that it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employments for my time and strength than such arguments would imply.
What then remains to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine, that God did not establish it, that our doctors of divinity are mistaken? There is blasphemy in the thought. That which is inhuman cannot be divine. Who can reason on such a proposition? I cannot. The time for such argument is past.
At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument is needed. Oh, had I the ability and could I reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty, an unholy license, your national greatness, swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are, to him, mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages.
There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival.
Take the American slave trade, which is especially prosperous just now and carried on in all the large towns and cities in one half of this Confederacy. In several states, this trade is a chief source of wealth. It is called the internal slave trade, in order to divert from it the horror with which the foreign slave trade is contemplated. That trade has long since been denounced by this government as piracy, as an execrable traffic. To arrest it, this nation keeps a squadron at immense cost on the coast of Africa. Everywhere in this country, it is safe to speak of this foreign slave trade as a most inhuman traffic, opposed alike to the laws of God and of man. It is, however, a notable fact that while so much execration is poured out by Americans upon those engaged in the foreign slave trade, the men engaged in the slave trade between the states pass without condemnation, and their business is deemed honorable.
Behold, the practical operation of this eternal slave trade, the American slave trade, sustained by American politics and American religion. Here you will see men and women reared like swine for the market. You know what is a swine drover? I will show you a man drover. They inhabit all our southern states. They perambulate the country and crowd the highways of the nations with droves of human stock. You will see one of these human flesh jobbers, armed with pistol, whip, and bowie knife, driving a company of 100 men, women, and children from the Potomac to the slave market at New Orleans. These wretched people are to be sold singly or in lots to suit purchasers. They are food for the cotton field and the deadly sugar mill.
Mark the sad procession as it moves wearily along, and the humane wretch who drives them. Hear his savage yells and his blood-chilling oaths as he hurries on his affrighted captives. See, there the old man, with locks thinned and gray. Cast one glance, if you please, upon that young mother whose shoulders are bare to the scorching sun, her briny tears falling on the brow of the babe in her arms. See, too, that girl of 13, weeping,
yes, weeping as she thinks of the mother from whom she has been torn. The drove moves tardily. Heat and sorrow have nearly consumed their strength. Suddenly you hear a quick snap, like the discharge of a rifle. The fetters clang and the chains rattle simultaneously. Your ears are saluted with a scream that seems to have torn its way to the center of your soul. The crack you heard was the sound of the slave whip. The scream you heard was from the woman you saw with the babe. Her speed has faltered under the weight of her child and her chains. That gash on her shoulder tells her to move on.
Follow the droves to New Orleans, attend the auction, see men examined like horses, see the forms of women rudely and brutally exposed to the shocking gaze of American slave buyers. See this drove sold and separated forever, and never forget the deep, sad sobs that arose from the scattered multitude. Tell me, citizens, where under the sun can you witness a spectacle more fiendish and shocking? Yet, this is but a glance at the American slave trade, as it exists at this moment in the United States.
In the name of the Messiah. Fellow citizens, this murderous traffic is today in active operation in this boasted republic. In the solitude of my spirit, I see clouds of dust raised on the highways of the South. I see the bleeding footsteps. I hear the doleful wail of fettered humanity on the way to the slave markets. On the way to the slave markets, where the victims are to be sold like horses, sheep and swine, knocked off to the highest bidder. There I see the tenderest ties ruthlessly broken to gratify the lust, the caprice, the rapacity of the buyers and sellers of men. In the name of the Messiah. God bless Worcester. God bless everybody. Thank you.
By an act of the American Congress, not yet 2 years old, slavery has been nationalized in its most horrible and revolting form. Mason and Dixon's line has been obliterated. New York has become as Virginia, and the power to hold, hunt, and sell men, women, and children as slaves remains no longer a mere state institution, but is now an institution of the whole United States.
The power is coexistive with the Star-Spangled Banner and American Christianity. Where these go, may also go the merciless slave hunter. Where these are, man is not sacred. He is a bird for the sportsman's gun. By that most foul and fiendish of all human decrees, the liberty and person of every man are put in peril. Your broad Republican domain is hunting ground for men.
Your lawmakers have commanded all good citizens to engage in this hellish sport. Your president, your secretary of state enforce, as a duty you owe to your free and glorious country, and to your God, that you do this accursed thing. Not fewer than 40 Americans have, within the past 2 years, been hunted down and, without a moment's warning, hurried away in chains, and consigned to slavery and excruciating torture. Some of these have had wives and children, dependent on them for bread, but of this no account was made. The right of the hunter to his prey stands superior to the right of marriage, and to all rights in this republic, the rights of God included.
For black men, that there are neither law nor justice, humanity nor religion, the fugitive slave law makes mercy to them a crime and bribes the judge who tries them. An American judge gets $10 for every victim he consigns to slavery, and 5 when he fails to do so. The oath of any 2 villains is sufficient under this hell-black enactment to send the most pious and exemplary black man into the remorseless jaws of slavery. His own testimony is nothing. He can bring no witnesses for himself. The minister of American justice is bound by the law to hear but one side, and that side is the side of the oppressor. Let this damning fact be perpetually told. Let it be thundered around the world that in tyrant-killing, king-hating, people-loving, democratic Christian America, the seats of justice are filled with judges who hold their offices under an open and palpable bribe and are bound in deciding in the case of a man's liberty to hear only his accusers.
In glaring violation of justice, in shameless disregard of the forms of administering law, in cunning arrangement to entrap the defenseless, and in diabolical intent, this fugitive slave law stands alone in the annals of tyrannical legislation.
Americans, your Republican politics, not less than your Republican religion, are flagrantly inconsistent. You boast of your love of liberty, your superior civilization, and your pure Christianity, while the whole political power of the nation is solemnly pledged to support and perpetuate the enslavement of 3 million of your countrymen. You hurl your anathemas at the crown-headed tyrants of Russia and Austria, and pride yourself on your democratic institutions, while you yourselves consent to be the mere tools and bodyguards of the tyrants of Virginia and Carolina. You invite to your shores fugitives of oppression from abroad, honor them with banquets, greet them with ovations, cheer them, toast them, salute them, protect them, and pour out your money to them like water. But the fugitives from your own land you advertise, hunt, arrest, shoot, and kill.
You discourse eloquently on the dignity of labor, yet you sustain a system which, in its very essence, casts a stigma upon labor. You can bare your bosom to the storm of British artillery to throw off a 3-penny tax on tea, and yet you wring the last hard-earned farthing from the grasp of the black laborers of your country. You profess to believe that of one blood God made all nations of men to dwell on the face of all the earth, and hath commanded all men everywhere to love one another. Yet you notoriously hate, and glory in your hatred, all the men whose skin are not the same color as yours.
You declare before the world and are understood by the world to declare that you hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet you hold securely in a bondage which, according to your own Thomas Jefferson, is worse than ages of that which your fathers rose in rebellion to oppose, a 7th part of the inhabitants of your country.
Fellow citizens, I will not enlarge further on your national inconsistencies. The existence of slavery in this country brands your republicanism as a sham, your humanity as a base pretense, and your Christianity as a lie. It destroys your moral power abroad. It corrupts your politicians at home. It saps the foundation of religion and makes your name a hissing. And by word of a mocking earth, be warned, a horrible reptile is coiled up in your nation's bosom, the venomous creatures nursing at the tender breast of your youthful republic. For the love of God, tear away and fling from your hideous monster, and let the weight of 20 million crush and destroy it forever.
Allow me to say in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. I therefore leave off where I began, with hope. While drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions, my spirit is cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age. Nations do not stand in the same relation to each other that they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself up from the surrounding world and trot round in the same old path of its fathers without interference.
The time was when such could be done, but a change has now come over the affairs of mankind. Walled cities and empires have become unfashionable. The arm of commerce has borne away the gates of the strong city. Intelligence is penetrating the darkest corners of the globe. Wind, steam, and lightning are its chartered agents. Oceans no longer divide, but link nations together. From Boston to London is now a holiday excursion. Space is comparatively annihilated. Thoughts expressed on one side of the Atlantic are distinctly heard on the other. In the fervent aspirations of William Lord Garrison, I say, and let every heart join in saying it.
Godspeed, the day when human blood shall cease to flow, and every clime be understood, the claims of human brotherhood, and each return for evil, good, not blow for blow. That day will come, all feuds to end, and change into a faithful friend each foe. Again, thank you all for being a part of this reading today. We want to thank the City of Worcester, the Worcester Cultural Council Commission, the Public Library, the NAACP Worcester Branch, the National Park Association, National Parks. I can't see that one. Mass Humanities as well. We don't want to forget them for being a very, very big part of what we have going on here. And I guess I'm getting all of the people who are a part of this and we need to acknowledge. Again, sponsored by the City of Worcester and the Worcester Cultural Coalition in collaboration with the American Antiquarian Societies, Jeremiah Zinn's Higgins Armory Museum, John H. Chaff Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor, Mass Humanities, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Community Breakfast Committee, the Willis Center, Worcester Historical Museum, Worcester Public Library, Worcester Public Schools, the Worcester Unit of NAACP again, and Worcester Women's History Project, as well as the Worcester Youth Center. Again, thank you all for being a part of this, and we'll hope to see you again next year. And if you're interested in registering to vote, we have a voter registration over here as well. Thank you all.